Blind groom regains sight on wedding day and freezes when he sees his bride. The long-awaited day had finally arrived. Raphael was nervous as he adjusted his tie in front of the mirror that for 15 years had served merely as decoration. In his bedroom, his trembling fingers carefully touched the bandage covering his recently operated eyes. In a few hours he would remove that cloth and for the first time in so long see the face of the woman who had won his heart through her voice, her touch, and her soul. "Are you sure you want to do this today, son?" asked Margaret, his mother, with a tone of concern that barely disguised her disapproval. "The doctor said it would be better to wait a few more days." "Mum, we've waited long enough. 15 years in darkness. Today I want the first image that returns to my life to be Julia's face," Raphael replied, feeling his heart race just thinking about the moment. Since the accident in his teens that took his sight, Raphael had learned to live in darkness. He adapted, graduated from law school, established his own practice, but something was always missing. So until he met Julia at a support group for the visually impaired, where she worked as a volunteer. 6 months of friendship, 2 years of dating, and now they were minutes away from becoming husband and wife. "This girl isn't right for you, Raphael," insisted Margaret, adjusting her son's suit with calculated precision. "There's something about her that doesn't convince me. You think you know a person, but—" "Enough, Mom," interrupted Raphael. "Today is the happiest day of my life. I won't let your issues with Julia ruin it." On the other side of the small church in Riverdale, a quiet town in rural Virginia, Julia faced her reflection in a foggy mirror in a small room used as an improvised dressing area. Her fingers traced the scar that ran from the corner of her left eye down to her chin. For 15 years, this mark had made her feel incomplete, unworthy. But Raphael never knew. To him, she was perfect. "You look beautiful," said Claire, her best friend, adjusting the veil. Raphael will be speechless. "That's what terrifies me," Julia confessed, feeling tears threatening to smudge the makeup carefully applied to conceal the scar. "What if when he sees me like this, everything changes?" Dear viewer, if you're enjoying this story, please stay with us through this short break. We'll be right back with more of When Eyes Meet Heart on Lifetime Movies. Claire held her friend's hands firmly. "If he stops loving you because of a scar, then he's not the man we thought he was. But we know Raphael isn't like that." What nobody knew was the secret Julia carried. She and Raphael hadn't met by chance. They were in the same vehicle on that fateful day 15 years ago. The school bus was returning from a field trip when the driver lost control. Raphael and Julia, then teenagers from different schools, didn't know each other, but in that moment of chaos, they were united by destiny. She pulled him out of the wreckage, taking the impact of broken glass on her face. The last image Raphael had before permanent darkness was Julia's bloodied face, a stranger who risked her own life to save his. 15 years later, when she found him at the support group, she recognized him immediately. He, however, could never know she was that girl. Julia feared he would blame her for the accident, think she hadn't done enough, or worse, pity her. "It's time," announced Claire, looking at the clock. "The guests are waiting." In the small, cozy church, about 50 people waited. Raphael stood at the altar, next to his best friend, Edward. The latter carried his own burden of guilt. It was he who, while drunk, had crashed his car into the school bus that day. The same accident that connected Raphael and Julia without them knowing. "Are you okay?" asked Edward, noting the tension on his friend's face. "I've never been so nervous in my life," confessed Raphael, touching the bandage over his eyes. "What if the surgery didn't work? What if when I remove this, there's still only darkness?" Edward swallowed hard. Every time the accident was mentioned, even indirectly, he felt the weight of guilt crushing his chest. He never had the courage to confess the truth. For 15 years, Raphael believed the accident was caused by an unknown driver who fled the scene. No one ever connected Edward to the incident. "Everything will be fine," replied Edward, unable to look at his friend's bandaged eyes. "You deserve this more than anyone." The small orchestra began playing the wedding march. The guests stood. Raphael felt his heart almost jump out of his mouth. This was the moment. Slowly, with trembling hands, he began to remove the bandage. "Son, are you sure?" whispered Margaret, who was by his side. "The doctor said—" "I am, Mom," he answered, determined. "I want her face to be the first thing I see." The bandage fell. Raphael blinked several times, trying to adjust to the light and colors that invaded his eyes after 15 years of darkness. At first, everything was a blur. Shapes, colors, lights. Then, slowly, the images began to gain definition. He saw the altar. He saw the flowers. He saw the guests. And then, at the end of the aisle, he saw a figure in white who began walking toward him. His heart seemed to want to leap from his chest. As Julia advanced, her face became clearer. The scar, which she had tried so hard to hide with makeup, was visible to Raphael. And then something extraordinary happened. His body stiffened, his legs weakened, his eyes widened in absolute shock. Julia noticed his reaction, and her world collapsed. He was horrified by her appearance, ashamed of his future wife. The entire room fell silent, watching this disconcerting scene. She stopped in the middle of the aisle, unable to continue. "I knew it," she murmured to herself, tears streaming down her face, ruining the makeup she had worked so hard to apply perfectly. "I knew this would happen." Julia turned to leave, her heart shattered, when she heard Raphael's voice trembling and filled with emotion. "Wait!" he shouted, taking a few steps forward, almost stumbling, still not used to walking guided by sight instead of touch. "Please, wait." The guests watched in confusion. Margaret seemed satisfied, as if her plan had worked. Claire and Edward exchanged apprehensive looks. "It's you," said Raphael, the words barely leaving his dry mouth from emotion. "That girl from the accident." The silence became even deeper. Julia froze, her back still turned to the altar, unable to face Raphael or the guests. "I never forgot your face," he continued, his voice breaking. "It was the last thing I saw before the darkness. An angel. You saved me." Slowly, Julia turned around. Tears now flowed freely, without any concern for makeup. How can you recognize me after so long?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. "Your face has been etched in my memory for 15 years, replied Raphael, walking to her, still unsure of his steps. "Every day I thought about the girl who risked her own life to pull me out of that bus, who took on her face the shards that could have been mine." Julia couldn't believe what she was hearing. It wasn't horror or repulsion she saw on Raphael's face. It was recognition, gratitude, love. "Why did you never tell me?" he asked, finally reaching her in the middle of the aisle. "Why hide something like this from me?" I was afraid," she confessed. "Afraid you would blame me for not doing more. Afraid you would feel pity. Afraid you'd only be with me out of gratitude, not love." Raphael touched her face, his fingers gently tracing the scar he now clearly saw. The touch was familiar. For 2 years he had seen that face with his fingertips, never suspecting the scar that Julia so carefully hid with stories of perfectly smooth skin. "How could I blame the person who saved my life?" he asked, tears now flowing freely from his newly healed eyes. "How could I feel anything but love and gratitude?" At that moment, a sudden movement in the front row caught everyone's attention. Margaret stood up, visibly disturbed. "You knew?" asked Raphael, looking at his mother. "You knew she was the girl from the accident?" Margaret's silence was answer enough. She looked away, unable to face her son. "I discovered it a few months ago," she finally admitted. "When I saw her scar, something seemed familiar. I looked through old photos, news reports about the accident. And yet you tried to keep me away from her." Raphael's voice overflowed with disbelief and hurt. "I was only trying to protect you, son," replied Margaret, her voice trembling. "I thought if you knew, you would stay with her out of obligation, out of gratitude. Not true love." Raphael shook his head, disappointed. "True love is exactly what I feel, Mom, and nothing you say or do can change that." Another movement caught everyone's attention. Edward stood up, his face pale, his hands shaking. "I need to speak," he said, his voice almost disappearing. "I can't carry this secret any longer." Raphael and Julia turned to him, confused. "It was me," confessed Edward, tears in his eyes. "I caused the accident. I was drunk that night. I hit the school bus and ran. For 15 years I've lived with this guilt, watching you suffer, watching you adapt to the darkness I caused." A murmur of shock ran through the church. Raphael staggered backward as if he'd been punched. Julia held him, preventing him from falling. "How could you?" asked Raphael, his voice breaking. "How could you lie to me all these years?" "I was young, I was terrified," replied Edward, the words coming out broken. "And then it became harder and harder to tell the truth. I was afraid of losing your friendship, of going to prison. I was a coward." Raphael closed his eyes, trying to process so many revelations in so little time. When he opened them again, he looked at Julia, at his mother, at Edward. "This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life," he said, "and suddenly, it seems like my whole life was built on lies." "Not everything," said Julia, squeezing his hand. "What we feel for each other is real. It always has been." Raphael looked at her, really looked at her. The scar that marked her face didn't diminish her beauty at all. On the contrary, for him it represented courage, sacrifice, heroism. "Are you willing to start over?" he asked. "With the whole truth this time?" "I am," she replied without hesitation. Raphael then turned to the guests, to the pastor who waited patiently, to his mother and Edward. "We still have a wedding to conduct," he announced, "and afterward we'll have much to discuss, all of us." The pastor, who had watched the entire scene in respectful silence, stepped forward. "Do you still wish to be united in matrimony?" he asked. "More than ever," Raphael and Julia answered in unison. And so, amid revelations, tears, and long-hidden truths, the ceremony proceeded. Raphael and Julia exchanged vows, promising honesty, understanding, and unconditional love. When the pastor declared them husband and wife, Raphael looked deeply into the eyes of his now wife, seeing not just the scar, but the brave and loving soul he had first known through touch, voice, and heart. Dear viewer, if you're enjoying this story, please stay with us through this short break. We'll be right back with more of When Eyes Meet Heart on Lifetime Movies. The first days after the wedding were an emotional roller coaster. Raphael was amazed by the rediscovery of the visual world, the colors of sunset, the details of a flower, the deep blue of Julia's eyes. At the same time, he struggled to process the revelations from the wedding day. Edward had distanced himself, too ashamed to face the friend he had betrayed for so many years. Margaret tried to make amends, but her relationship with her son and daughter-in-law was strained, and Julia, despite the happiness of finally being married to the man she loved, couldn't help but worry. Now that Raphael could see, would he continue to love her? "What are you thinking about?" asked Raphael, finding Julia on the porch of the small house they had rented in Riverdale. It was a warm summer night, the sky dotted with stars that Raphael could now see. "How everything changed so quickly," she replied, unable to look at him directly. It was a habit she was trying to overcome. For years, she had become accustomed to the fact that Raphael couldn't see her face, her expressions, her scar. Now she felt exposed. Raphael sat beside her, taking her hands in his. "Some things haven't changed. What I feel for you has only grown stronger." Julia smiled, but there was a shadow of insecurity in her eyes. "Sometimes I catch you looking at other women on the street, women without scars." Raphael sighed. "I look at everything, Julia. It's like the world is new to me. I'm rediscovering colors, shapes, expressions, but nothing I see fascinates me more than you." He gently touched the scar on her face, as he did when he was blind. "This only makes me love you even more. It's physical proof of your heart, your courage." His words calmed some of Julia's insecurities, but she knew it would be a long journey, until she felt completely comfortable with her appearance again. The next morning, Raphael received an unexpected visit at his law office. It was Edward, pale and visibly nervous. "Can I come in?" he asked, standing at the door. Raphael hesitated. He still hadn't decided if he could forgive his friend's betrayal, but he nodded, indicating the chair in front of him. "I came to say goodbye," said Edward, sitting down. "I'm turning myself into the police. I'm going to tell them everything about the accident." Raphael's eyes widened. "After 15 years? Why now?" "Because I can't live with this guilt anymore," replied Edward. "And because you deserve justice." Raphael was silent for a long moment, observing the man he had considered his best friend for so many years. He saw the suffering in his eyes, the guilt that was eating him up. "I don't think putting you in prison now will change anything," he finally said. "What happened, happened. I can't get back the 15 years I spent in darkness. So, what do you suggest? That I just go on with my life as if nothing happened?" "No," replied Raphael firmly. "I suggest you use what happened to do something good. Have you been drinking since that time?" Edward lowered his eyes. "I stopped after the accident. Never touched a drop of alcohol again." "That's a start," said Raphael. "But it's not enough. I want you to go to the rehabilitation center where Julia and I met. They need volunteers. People who can read to the blind. Accompany them on outings, help them with daily tasks." Edward looked at him surprised. "You want me to work with the visually impaired?" "I want you to understand the world you forced me to live in for 15 years, replied Raphael. "I want you to help people who, unlike me, will never have the chance to regain their sight." It was a fair sentence, Edward thought. It wouldn't involve bars or cells, but it would require him to face the consequences of his actions daily. "I'll do it," he promised, his voice breaking. "I'll dedicate my life to helping these people." When Edward left, Raphael realized that a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Forgiveness was a process, not an event, but this was a beginning. At home, Julia faced her own challenges. Margaret had appeared without warning, carrying a box of old photographs. "We need to talk," she said, without waiting for an invitation. To enter. Julia reluctantly let her pass. Her relationship with her mother-in-law had always been complicated, even before the wedding revelations. "What are these photos?" asked Julia, sitting in the small living room. "Memories," replied Margaret, opening the box. "Things Raphael couldn't see for 15 years. I thought maybe you'd want to show them to him now." Julia picked up one of the photographs. Teenage Raphael, smiling, his eyes bright and full of life without any indication of the darkness that awaited him. "Why are you doing this?" asked Julia, suspicious. "Why this sudden change in attitude?" Margaret sighed deeply. "Because I realized I was wrong. When I saw his reaction to recognizing you, when I saw the true love in my son's eyes, I understood. I was fighting against something real." "You really knew who I was?" "I suspected from the beginning," admitted Margaret. "There was something familiar about you, but I only became certain when I found this photo." She showed an old newspaper page with a report about the accident. There was a photo of Julia being taken to the ambulance, her face bloodied but recognizable. "Why didn't you tell him?" "For the same reason you didn't tell him," replied Margaret. "I thought he would be with you out of gratitude, not love. I wanted to protect him." Julia then understood that in distorted ways they had both tried to protect Raphael. Both had made the mistake of hiding the truth, thinking they knew what was best for him. "Shall we try again?" asked Margaret, extending her hand. "For Raphael's sake." Julia hesitated, but accepted the gesture. "For Raphael's sake," she agreed. In the weeks that followed, life began to find a new rhythm. Raphael adapted to his recovered vision, sometimes marveling at the beauty of the world, other times overwhelmed by so many visual stimuli. Julia returned to work as a volunteer at the rehabilitation center, now occasionally accompanied by Edward, who was keeping his promise. But not everything was rosy. The economy of the small town of Riverdale was facing difficulties, and Raphael's law practice began to feel the impact. Clients cancelled contracts, new cases were scarce. "I'm worried," confessed Raphael to Julia one night as they reviewed the bills. "If this continues, we'll have to cut expenses, maybe even sell the house." The house was a small cottage they had bought with their savings, the dream of a place of their own. The idea of losing it was devastating. "We'll figure it out," assured Julia. "We always have." The next day, Raphael received a visitor at his office, Gabrielle, a renowned attorney from the city who was passing through town. Tall, elegant, and classically beautiful, Gabrielle made an immediate impact on Raphael. who still marveled at each new face he saw. "I've heard about your work with accessibility cases," she said, sitting down gracefully. "Impressive, especially considering your previous condition." "Former condition?" corrected Raphael, feeling a twinge of pride. "The surgery was a success." "Fascinating," replied Gabrielle, leaning slightly forward. "It must be amazing to rediscover the visual world after so long." For hours they talked about law, accessibility, and Raphael's unique experience. Gabrielle showed not just professional interest, but personal, occasionally touching Raphael's arm, while speaking, laughing at his jokes, looking at him in a way that he, inexperienced in the visual languages of flirtation, couldn't properly interpret. "I'm putting together a project in Washington," she said finally. "A law firm specializing in the rights of people with disabilities. Someone with your experience and knowledge would be invaluable. Would you be interested?" The offer landed like a bombshell. A job in Washington, with a salary probably much higher than what he earned in Riverdale, working exactly in the field he was passionate about. It seemed too perfect to be true. "I need to think," he replied, stunned. "Discuss it with my wife." "Of course," said Gabrielle, standing to leave. "But don't take too long. It's a unique opportunity." That night, Raphael told Julia about the proposal. He expected enthusiasm, but found apprehension. "Washington?" she asked, concerned. "That's 4 hours from here. We'd have to move." "It would be a fresh start," argued Raphael. "Better salary, bigger opportunities. We could buy a much better house than this one." "I like this house," replied Julia, her voice low. "I like Riverdale. My volunteer work, our friends. You'll find other rehabilitation centers in Washington, bigger, better ones." Julia noticed something different in Raphael's enthusiasm. "This lawyer, Gabrielle, what is she like?" Raphael hesitated, catching himself thinking about Gabrielle's elegance and beauty. "Professional, competent, and beautiful? Does that matter?" he returned, defensive. "It matters if it influenced your decision." The discussion quickly escalated, touching on insecurities both were trying to ignore. Julia feared that now that Raphael could see, he would be attracted to women without scars, without the complicated past they shared. Raphael, in turn, felt suffocated by guilt whenever he caught himself admiring other women, other faces. In the days that followed, Raphael spent more time at the office, often in conference calls with Gabrielle discussing project details. Julia immersed herself deeper in her volunteer work, as if trying to prove to herself that what she did in Riverdale was too important to abandon. The tension between them grew. Small discussions transformed into heated debates about the future, about trusting each other, about what really mattered in life. On a particularly difficult afternoon at the rehabilitation center, Julia found Edward working with a group of blind children, teaching them to identify objects by touch. "You're doing well," she commented, observing the patience with which he guided the small hands. "It's the least I can do," he replied, the guilt still evident in his voice. "How are things with Raphael?" Julia hesitated. "Complicated. He received a job offer in Washington." Edward stopped what he was doing. "Is he going to accept?" "I think so," she replied, the sadness showing through. "There's a lawyer involved. Beautiful, successful. I think he's impressed." "Raphael isn't that kind of man," said Edward with conviction. "I've known him for years. He loves you." "People change," replied Julia, especially when they gain a new perspective. Dear viewer, if you're enjoying this story, please stay with us through this short break. We'll be right back with more of When Eyes Meet Heart on Lifetime Movies. Later that day, while sorting through some documents in Raphael's office, Julia found something that made her heart sink, a photograph of Gabriel. Beautiful, elegant, unmarred. On the back of the photo, a handwritten note. "Thinking of you and our future together." The words seemed to confirm her worst fears. Raphael was being drawn not just by the professional opportunity, but by Gabrielle, by a new beginning without the complications of their shared past. When Raphael arrived home that night, he found Julia with her bags packed. "What's going on?" he asked, confused. "I'm going back to my aunt's house," replied Julia, her voice breaking but firm. "For a while, until we decide what to do." "What are you talking about?" Julia handed him the photograph of Gabrielle with the note. "I found this in your office." Raphael looked at the photo, shocked. "I've never seen this before. She must have left it there without me noticing." "Convenient," replied Julia, the hurt evident in every word. "Why would she write about our future together if you didn't give her reason to?" "Julia, you're misunderstanding everything. Yes, she offered me a job, but there was never anything beyond that." "I'm not so sure anymore," said Julia, picking up her bags. "I see how you look at her, at other women. I understand now why the idea of moving away from here seems so appealing to you." "This is insane," protested Raphael, blocking the door. "You're letting your insecurities create problems where none exist." "Get out of the way, Raphael. Not until we talk about this properly." "There's nothing to talk about," she replied, tears now flowing freely. "You have a new life now, new horizons. I'm just a reminder of darker times." Before Raphael could respond, a sudden dizziness hit him. His vision briefly blurred, and he had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. "Raphael." Julia's voice immediately changed from anger to concern. "What is it?" "Nothing," he replied, blinking several times to clear his vision. "Just a little tired." But it wasn't just tiredness, and they both knew it. In recent weeks, Raphael had been having similar episodes, increasingly frequent. Dizziness, blurred vision, headaches. "You need to go back to the doctor," insisted Julia, momentarily forgetting the fight. "I'm fine," Raphael stubbornly maintained, though the fear was evident in his eyes. "It's just stress from work." That night, Julia didn't leave the house. Her concern for Raphael's health overrode her hurt and insecurities. But the mood between them remained tense, laden with unspoken words and unfaced fears. The next morning, Raphael woke up to a world of shadows. His vision, so miraculously recovered, had deteriorated overnight. He could see shapes, light, movement, but the details were being lost again. "Julia," he called, panic in his voice, "I can't see clearly." She ran to the bedroom, finding him sitting on the bed, blinking frantically, as if trying to clear an invisible fog. "We're going to the hospital now," she said, helping him dress. At Riverdale Regional Hospital, the diagnosis was devastating. The experimental surgery that had restored Raphael's vision was failing. The regenerated tissue was beginning to deteriorate. "How long?" asked Raphael to the doctor, squeezing Julia's hand tightly. "Hard to say," replied the doctor, avoiding looking directly at the couple. "Weeks, maybe a month or two. The deterioration seems to be accelerating." "And there's nothing that can be done?" "Unfortunately, the technique is still experimental. We could try another surgery, but the chances of success are minimal, and the risks—" Raphael didn't need to hear more. He understood that the temporary miracle he had experienced was coming to an end. Darkness was reclaiming him again. During the drive back home, Raphael remained silent. Julia drove, occasionally glancing worriedly at her husband, who seemed to have aged years in just one morning. "We'll look for other doctors," she said, finally breaking the silence. "Research alternative treatments. We won't give up." Raphael nodded but didn't respond. His mind was far away, reliving images that soon he would no longer be able to see. Julia's face, the colors of the sky, the flowers in their garden. That night, sitting on the porch under the stars, Raphael finally spoke. "I understand now," he said, his voice low, "why you found that photo of Gabrielle." Julia looked at him confused. "She left it there," continued Raphael, "to cause exactly what happened between us. She found out about my condition, the vision problems I started having. She knew the surgery was failing. How would she know that? Because she researched it. She found the doctor who operated on me, talked to him. She knew it was just a matter of time until I went blind again." Julia tried to process what she was hearing. "But why? Why would she do that?" "The Washington law firm," replied Raphael bitterly. "They don't want a blind lawyer. They wanted the symbolism of someone who had overcome blindness, an inspiring example. When she found out I would return to darkness, she decided to cut ties. And what better way to do that than to destroy my marriage?" the pieces began to fit together. Gabrielle's sudden appearance in Riverdale, the excessive interest in Raphael's condition, the tempting proposal followed by a compromising note strategically placed. "Why didn't you tell me about the vision problems?" asked Julia, feeling guilty for having doubted him. "Because I was afraid," admitted Raphael, "afraid of losing you when I became blind again, of being a burden to you." "How could you think that?" Julia's voice was a mixture of hurt and indignation. "I met you when you were blind, Raphael. I fell in love with you when you were blind. I never cared about that. But everything changed when I regained my sight," he argued. "I saw how insecure you became about your scar, how you feared I would look at other women. I thought when I returned to darkness you would feel trapped with me out of obligation." "Is that what you think I am? Someone so shallow that I would only stay with you if you could see?" Raphael shook his head. "No, just someone who deserves to choose, not be forced to care for a disabled husband." Julia took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her, even though his vision was increasingly blurry. "I choose you," she said firmly, "blind or not, with scars or not. I choose you every day in any circumstance." That night, for the first time in weeks, they really talked about fears, insecurities, about what it truly meant to love someone, about how his recovered vision, instead of strengthening their relationship, had almost destroyed it, bringing to the surface insecurities that had remained dormant in darkness. "I'll call Gabrielle tomorrow," said Raphael as they prepared for bed. "Formally decline the offer." "Are you sure?" asked Julia. "Even if she has ulterior motives, it's an important professional opportunity." Raphael smiled, touching Julia's face as he did when he was blind, his fingers gently tracing the scar she so feared. "There are more important things," he replied. "Like building a life here with you, I can be a successful lawyer even blind. I've proved that before." In the days that followed, Raphael and Julia began to prepare for what seemed inevitable. They reorganized the house to facilitate movement when blindness returned completely. Julia tirelessly researched alternative treatments, international specialists, any hope, however small. One afternoon, as Raphael tried to read some case files, straining against his increasingly deteriorating vision, he received an unexpected visit. It was Edward, carrying a thick folder of documents. "I found something," he said without preamble. "A specialist in Switzerland who's doing advanced research in ocular tissue regeneration." Raphael raised his eyes from the papers, struggling to focus on his friend's face. "How did you find out about this?" "I've been researching day and night," replied Edward. "It's the least I can do after everything I caused." There was genuine dedication in Edward's efforts, a real attempt to compensate for the years of lies and the accident that had forever changed Raphael's life. "The treatment is experimental," continued Edward, "but the results are promising. The problem is that it's expensive. Very expensive." Raphael leafed through the documents, although he could barely read the words. "How much?" $200,000 at least, plus airfare, accommodation, expenses. It was an impossible amount for them. Even selling the house, the car, saving every penny, they couldn't gather that much money in time. "I appreciate the effort," said Raphael, returning the documents, "but I'll have to accept the inevitable." Edward, however, wasn't willing to give up so easily. "I have an idea," he said. "A way to get the money." Raphael looked at him, suspicious. "What idea?" "My father has a beach house he hasn't used in years. It's easily worth $300,000. I'm willing to sell it and use the money for your treatment." Raphael was stunned. "Edward, I can't accept that. It's a fortune." "It's the least I can do," insisted Edward. "If it weren't for me, you would never have lost your sight in the first place." Raphael was moved by the offer, but knew he couldn't accept it. It wasn't fair, it wasn't right. "I need to think," he said finally. "Talk to Julia." That night, he told Julia about Edward's offer. He expected her to agree with his decision to refuse, but to his surprise, she had a different opinion. "Oh, you should accept," she said. "What, Julia, it's a fortune. We can't let him sell a family property to help us." "This isn't just about help," she argued. "It's about responsibility. He caused the accident that took your sight. He never faced the legal consequences, never paid for it." This sounds like revenge, not justice. It's not revenge, insisted Julia. It's a way for him to do what's right, to repair at least partially the damage he caused. Raphael considered her words. There was truth in them, but still, accepting so much money from Edward made him uncomfortable. Let's do this, he finally proposed. We accept the money as a loan. When I can see again, I'll work until I pay back every cent. Julia smiled, seeing in the plan a solution that satisfied both their sense of justice. I think he'll accept those terms. The next morning, Raphael called Edward and proposed the agreement. As expected, Edward tried to refuse the idea of a loan, insisting he wanted to donate the money, but eventually gave in, realizing it was the only way Raphael would accept the help. I'll put the house on the market today, promised Edward. With luck, we'll have the money in a few weeks. Hope, which had been extinguished in Raphael's heart, began to timidly rekindle. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance to keep the light in his life. In a few days, the news spread through the small town of Riverdale. The lawyer who had miraculously regained his sight was now losing it again and needed a considerable sum for an experimental treatment abroad. To Raphael and Julia's surprise, the community began to mobilize. The owner of the small market where they shopped started a fundraising campaign. The pastor of the church where they married organized a benefit lunch. Even their less affluent clients offered what they could. I don't understand, said Raphael to Julia, moved by the show of solidarity. Why would they do this for me? Because you did for them, she replied. All the times you defended someone who couldn't pay, all the causes you embraced without charging. People notice, Raphael. They care. The sale of Edward's beach house, combined with the community fundraising, produced a sum sufficient to cover the treatment and related expenses. In a few weeks, Raphael and Julia had their tickets booked for Switzerland. On the eve of the trip, Raphael had almost completely lost his vision. He could only distinguish lights and shadows, and even that with difficulty. But the despair of the first days had given way to a serene determination. Whatever the outcome, they would face it together. Before they left, they held a small thank-you dinner for those who had helped. Edward, some loyal clients, Margaret, who to everyone's surprise had contributed significantly to the cause. "Why did you do this, Mom?" asked Raphael when she handed him the check with a considerable amount. "Because I finally understood," she replied with tears in her eyes. "What really matters isn't whether you can see with your eyes, but with your heart. And your heart has always seen what is true." During dinner, Julia observed her husband interacting with the guests. Even nearly blind again, he moved with confidence, remembered where each person was seated, recognized voices, actively participated in conversations. There was a grace in his adaptability that she only now fully appreciated. Did they really need this treatment? Did their happiness really depend on Raphael being able to see? For a moment, she found herself questioning the necessity of the trip, the risky procedure, the enormous expense. But then she remembered his look when he saw her face for the first time, the genuine joy at rediscovering colors, shapes, expressions. No, they couldn't give up without trying. If there was indeed a chance, they needed to take it. At the Swiss clinic, after an exhausting battery of tests, the specialist presented his diagnosis. "The good news," he said in English, "is that your case is compatible with our experimental treatment. The original surgery was successful in regenerating the nerve tissue, but for some reason, the body is rejecting the new tissue." "And the bad news?" asked Raphael, squeezing Julia's hand. "The surgery has only a 40% chance of permanent success. There are significant risks, including the possibility of chronic pain and severe migraines, even if vision is restored." It was a difficult choice, to risk so much money, so much effort, on a procedure with such uncertain chances. Julia looked at Raphael, awaiting his decision. "My wife has a scar on her face," said Raphael to the doctor, surprising Julia. "From the corner of her left eye down to her chin. If I regain my sight, that's the first thing I want to see again." "It's worth any risk," the doctor smiled, moved by the statement. "Then let's schedule the surgery for Monday." In the days leading up to the procedure, Raphael and Julia explored the Swiss city like improvised tourists. He almost completely blind, she serving as eyes for both, describing in detail the ancient streets, the historical monuments, the breathtaking landscapes. "See that castle on the hill?" she would ask as they walked hand in hand. "They say it was built in the 12th century. The stones are a yellowish-grey tone, and there are red flags waving on the towers." Raphael smiled, creating mental images from her descriptions. He realized that even without being able to see, he was enjoying that walk as much as Julia. The company, the sensations, the smells, the sounds, everything contributed to a rich and complete experience. On the morning of the surgery, as they waited in the anteroom of the medical center, Raphael held Julia's hands tightly. "If it doesn't work," he said, "I want you to know I'm at peace with that. I learned to live without sight once. I can learn again." "It will work," she replied, trying to sound more confident than she really was. "But whatever happens, we'll be together." The surgery lasted 6 hours. Julia waited in the waiting room, alternating between silent prayers and long phone conversations with friends in Riverdale, who anxiously awaited news. When they finally allowed her to see Raphael in recovery, he had bandages covering both eyes, unconscious due to anesthesia. "The surgery went well," the doctor informed her. "Now we can only wait and see if the body will accept the treatment." The following days were of agonizing waiting. Raphael developed a fever, which the doctor explained was a common but concerning reaction. Julia hardly left the hospital room, sleeping in an uncomfortable chair, holding her husband's hand during the most intense episodes of pain. On the 5th day, the fever finally subsided. The doctor decided it was time to remove the bandages and check the results. "Ready?" he asked Raphael, who was sitting on the bed, tense. Raphael nodded, squeezing Julia's hand. Slowly, the doctor removed the external bandages, then the compresses that directly covered the eyes. "Keep your eyes closed for now," he instructed. "I'll dim the lights in the room." With the lights reduced to a soft glow, the doctor finally said, "You can open your eyes now." Slowly. Raphael obeyed, blinking several times. For a moment, his face showed no reaction. Then, tears began to stream down his cheeks. Raphael, Julia, could no longer contain her anxiety. "Can you see?" He turned his face toward her, his eyes finally focusing on hers. A smile slowly spread across his face. "You're even more beautiful than I remembered," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. The doctor performed a series of tests, confirming that vision had been restored, apparently successfully. He warned, however, that it was still too early to celebrate. The next few months would be crucial to determine if the procedure would have a lasting effect. "We'll have to monitor closely," he explained. "Perform regular exams. At the first sign of rejection, we need to intervene quickly." But at that moment, neither Raphael nor Julia was worried about the future. All that mattered was the miraculous present, the chance to see the world together again, even if temporarily. A week later, they received authorization to return to the United States. The doctor established a rigorous protocol for remote monitoring, with exams that could be performed at a clinic in the nearest city to Riverdale. "I'm anxious to see our house again," confessed Raphael during the flight home. "The streets of the town, the office, our friends." Julia held his hand, equally emotional. "I'm anxious to see you rediscover all that." When they finally arrived in Riverdale, they were surprised by a warm reception at the small regional airport. Edward, Margaret, clients, friends from the rehabilitation center, everyone was there with welcome signs and anxious smiles. "Did it work?" asked Edward, being the first to approach when he spotted them. "Can you see?" Raphael hugged his friend tightly. "It worked," he confirmed, "thanks to you." The following months were of readaptation. Raphael gradually returned to the routine of his law practice, now able to read case files without assistance, to see the faces of his clients, to walk the streets without a cane. Julia continued her volunteer work at the rehabilitation center, now with a unique perspective, someone who understood both the world of darkness and that of light. Her experience supporting Raphael during his periods of blindness and sight made her a valuable counselor for other families facing similar situations. Edward kept his promise to dedicate himself to working with the visually impaired, even after selling the house to pay for Raphael's treatment. In fact, he found in this work a vocation he had never felt before. Margaret considerably softened her stance toward Julia, even inviting her to regular Sunday lunches, something that would have been unthinkable before. Life finally seemed to find a happy balance. Raphael's vision remained stable, with no signs of rejection or deterioration. The periodic exams always brought good news. The couple even began to plan the possibility of having children, a dream they had postponed during periods of uncertainty. But not everything was rosy. Occasionally, Raphael still had intense headaches, a side effect of the treatment that the doctor had warned might be possible. On particularly bad nights, Julia would find him in the dark, eyes tightly closed, trying to control the pain. "I don't regret it," he would always say when she questioned whether the surgery had been worth it. "Seeing your face every day compensates for any pain." One Saturday afternoon, while organizing old photographs in the home office, Raphael found one in particular that made him pause. It was the photo from the accident, the same one Margaret had shown Julia months before. In the image, a young Julia was being taken to the ambulance, her face bloodied, but the courage evident in her eyes. "You never told me what really happened." "That day," said Raphael, showing the photo to Julia. "What made you go back to pull me out of the bus?" Julia hesitated. It was a memory she had tried to forget for years. "I was in the back seat when the car hit the bus," she began. "I got out easily, but I heard someone screaming inside. It was you." Raphael listened attentively, trying to recover fragmented memories from that day. "I went back to help, but when I found you, you were trapped between the wreckage. I managed to pull you out, but then part of the roof collapsed. A broken glass hit my face, and another hit your eyes. You risked your life for a complete stranger," said Raphael, amazed. "At that moment, I didn't think about it," replied Julia. "I just knew I needed to help." Raphael held her face between his hands, his fingers gently tracing the scar now so familiar. "Thank you," he said, with all the sincerity he could gather, "for saving me that day, for being by my side all these years, for being my light even, in the darkest hours." Julia smiled, tears of happiness shining in her eyes. "And thank you for seeing me, not just with your eyes, but with your heart, for seeing beyond the scar, beyond appearances." The next day, Raphael had an idea. Inspired by everything they had been through, he decided to set up a foundation to help people who, like him, needed advanced ophthalmological treatments but couldn't afford them. "We'll use the knowledge we've acquired," he explained to Julia, enthusiastic. "We can guide people about treatments, connect them with specialists, help raise funds." Julia loved the idea. It was a perfect way to transform their experience into something positive for others. Together, they began to plan the foundation, which they named New Perspectives. The official launch took place 6 months later at an event at the rehabilitation center where Julia worked. People from all over the region attended, including some journalists from larger outlets, attracted by Raphael's unusual story. "Our mission is simple," he said in his opening speech. "We believe everyone has the right to see the world in its fullness, that no one should be deprived of seeing the smile of those they love due to lack of resources." After the event, as they celebrated the successful launch, Edward approached the couple with a serious expression. "I have something for you," he said, handing them an envelope. "Half the value of the beach house. I consider the loan repaid." Raphael tried to refuse. "We agreed I would pay in installments." "The foundation needs this money more than I do," insisted Edward. "Besides, I found my own path through this experience. I'm finally at peace with my past mistakes." It was true. The Edward they knew, insecure, guilty, constantly seeking approval, had given way to a more mature and confident man. His work at the rehabilitation center had expanded, and he now coordinated an entire program dedicated to visually impaired children. "You gave me a purpose," he said with sincerity. "How could I charge for that?" In the years that followed, the New Perspectives Foundation grew considerably. Raphael and Julia managed to help dozens of people obtain treatments that would otherwise be inaccessible. Their personal experience made the work authentic and effective, They truly understood what their assistees were going through. Raphael's vision remained stable, although the headaches occasionally persisted. He learned to deal with them, considering them a small price to pay for the blessing of being able to see. 5 years after their wedding, Raphael and Julia finally realized another dream. They became parents to a healthy baby girl, whom they named Hope. The choice of name was no coincidence. It represented everything they had found together, even in the darkest moments. On a quiet afternoon, as Raphael watched Julia rocking little Hope in the garden of their home, he felt a deep gratitude for everything they had lived through. The difficulties, the pains, the uncertainties, everything had contributed to shaping the extraordinary life they now shared. "What are you thinking about?" asked Julia, noticing her husband's contemplative look. "How blessed we are," he replied. "How even when I was blind I never really lived in darkness. I always had you as my light." Julia smiled, that smile he never tired of admiring, with or without the scar. "And you always will," she promised. That night, lying side by side in bed while little Hope slept peacefully in the room next door, Raphael and Julia reflected on the journey that had brought them here, the accident that almost took their lives, but that ironically united them, the years of darkness, the brief moments of light, and finally, the balance they had found. "Do you know what I learned from all this?" asked Raphael, caressing Julia's hair. "What?" "That seeing goes far beyond the eyes. It's about perceiving what really matters, even when everything seems dark. It's about recognizing beauty in all its forms, even in imperfections." Julia propped herself up on her elbow, looking into her husband's eyes. "And what do you see when you look at me now?" Raphael smiled, gently touching the scar that marked her face. "I see the bravest and most beautiful woman I've ever known. I see my savior, my best friend, my love. I see our past, our present, and our future." "Even with this?" she asked, indicating the scar. "Especially with that," he replied. "This mark reminds me every day of your heart, your courage, your love. It's the most beautiful scar in the world because it tells the story of how we found each other, lost each other, and found each other again." Julia smiled, the last insecurities about her appearance finally completely dissipating. "I love you, Raphael, with or without sight. And I love you, Julia, today and always." The two fell asleep, embracing, at peace with the past and hopeful about the future. Their journey, from darkness to light, from fear to courage, from doubt to trust, would continue with new challenges and joys. But one thing was certain: they would face everything together, seeing with the eyes of the heart. The end. If you were moved by Raphael and Julia's story, stay tuned for more touching stories like this. Do you believe true love can really see beyond appearances? Join us next week for another heartwarming drama on Lifetime Movies.